Welcome back to Course of Action. My guest today is #1 New York Times bestselling author Brad Thor. Brad has been hailed as the master of thrillers and as America's favorite author. He's sold books in over 30 countries and he's been a part of Homeland Security's analytic Red Cell. We're going to get into that and more, plus Brad's new book, Shadow of a Doubt, which you absolutely have to pick up today. It's a top 5 Harvath book, in my opinion. You're going to love it. You're going to love this interview. And Brad even spills a little bit of details about the Harvath TV series. So, without further ado, Brad Thor. This is the Course of Action podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, and the Reeves Across America radio network. Watch every episode live on YouTube and check out the blog post on jeffclarkofficial.com. All right, everyone. I was going to start this interview off a little more lighthearted. I was going to joke around with Brad about his crystal ball, seeing into the future, seeing if he really knew that Taylor Swift was going to get all her Swifties into Kansas City Chiefs fans, some funny, lighthearted stuff like that. But this morning, we're reading articles about something that Brad wrote about in this book right here, Shadow of Doubt. It's about Russian nuclear mobile missile launchers, and you mentioned it in the book, and it happened.
Yeah.
It couldn't be better timing, really.
Yeah, I mean, as you and I are recording this, we're days away from the publication of Shadow of Doubt, and one of the things that I was saying would take things to a total next level as far as the threats in that part of the world is if Russia started practicing loading tactical nuclear weapons on their via their Iskander missiles onto their mobile launchers. And I saw the same thing this morning when I got up. That's exactly what they're drilling to do right now. So it is a pretty, for people who pay attention to this stuff, that's an escalation. That's taking things up a notch or two. That is not good that Russia is doing that. I think it's a signal of weakness on their part. I think it really suggests that they are not as confident in their war in Ukraine. And again, Shadow of Doubt's not about the war in Ukraine. Shadow of Doubt is actually in part about tactical nukes, battlefield nukes being moved, in the U.S. trying to figure out what Russia's up to. So the book doesn't take place in Ukraine, doesn't deal with Ukraine in that sense. But yeah, seeing that in the news this morning, I was like, oh my gosh! I mean, that's in the new book that comes out in just a couple of days.
Yeah, crazy. And, it definitely is an escalation. It's a signal that they're not joking around. Anytime, talk like that comes up, you kind of wonder and go, and Putin is a little bit of a wild card. We don't know what his intent is with it. It's scary to say the least.
Well, and as I said in the book, even though I don't call my Russian president Putin, when Putin says he's going to do something, he does it. I mean, there is every single time he's threatened to do something, he's followed it through. So I think that's, we're used to kind of decades in the Cold War and saber rattling by the Soviet Union and that kind of stuff. Putin's a different animal. I mean, he tells you point blank what he intends to do. And they have been very clear that they intend to use battlefield nuclear weapons if any number of criteria are achieved. So it can be, they feel that land is being taken from them that belongs to them, or that they suffer substantial losses on the battlefield, or if there's a loss of Putin's power at home, if he starts to lose control of his presidency in Russia and the people start turning against him and he needs a really rapid win in Ukraine and needs to bring it to a close, he's threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons to do that too. So it's something that I'm in the fiction business, the thriller space. I try to weave in real geopolitics, but yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. Seeing that appear in the paper tomorrow kind of sent a shiver. Paper today, sorry, sent a shiver down my spine, considering my book's basically out tomorrow. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah. So how close do you think we are to not necessarily nuclear war, but someone using a nuclear weapon?
I don't know. Putin's withdrawn the Black Sea fleet from the area around Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine doesn't even have a navy, and they have so hammered the Black Sea fleet that Putin's pulled it back to protect what's left of it. I don't know. Set against the backdrop of of basically putting nuclear, or rehearsing how to put nuclear tipped missiles onto their mobile launchers this morning, that we're learning about, we're also hearing about a massive prisoner exchange. That's a
Yes.
big deal that's going on this morning. And in Shadow of Doubt, I talk about the Russian assassin that kills a former Chechen military commander sitting on a park bench in Berlin. And this knucklehead, this Russian wet work guy, threw his pistol into a pond, which the Germans had no problem just magnet fishing and getting back. And I think that guy's part of the trade. I think that's what we'll learn. If we haven't learned, I've been doing interviews all day. If we haven't learned that already, we'll know that probably by the end of the day, that Russia got this assassin back. And that was something else from the book too. So
2 for 2.
yeah, it seems like stuff. This has been probably one of. I haven't lived in any other time periods, but being a little bit of a student of history, I think this is a very stressful period to be going through, not only at home but with things abroad. And we have our minds are like goldfish. I mean, the assassination attempt on Trump was in the news for a few days, and then it was gone. I mean, and that's a pretty significant thing, regardless of how you vote. And I mean, I've always been pretty clear. I'm not a Trump fan. As the son of a United States Marine, I believe character is destiny. I believe we really deserve good leaders packed with character and integrity. I understand the argument that some of my dear friends make for a second Trump presidency. I'm kind of staying out of that. But the fact that assassination attempt has pretty much passed out of the news, regardless of if it was an attempt on Biden or Trump or anyone else, the fact that that's come and gone so quickly, we really do have kind of the memory of goldfish now. And that's dangerous too, because, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it in many senses of the word. And I will say this, and I'll shut up and let you get to your next question. But I used to think it was a charming thing when I would hear the Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times." I didn't know that it was a curse. The stock market doesn't like interesting times. The stock market likes boring, predictable times.
Yes.
Interesting times mean there are surprises around every corner. That's not good. It's better to go decades and then make some news over a couple of days than to go days and make decades worth of news, which is kind of what we're seeing. It is a wild time to be alive, but as I say to everybody, and it's Jonah Goldberg's line from his book that I blurbed called Suicide in the West, if you were a soul in heaven and you got to choose where you would be born and when you would be born, you would choose right here, right now in the United States, not controlling for anything else, not knowing if you'd be handicapped, what color, what religion, what economic background. You would choose right now. We are living in the best moment in history, in the best country in the history of the world. But boy, are we making history rapidly. I mean, it's really happening fast.
I mean, just this whole year, and it's concerning. And I want to kind of get your take on this. It's concerning, the events that have happened this year. And again, regardless of, like you said, regardless of your political affiliation, who you vote for, we've had a former president get charged $350 million. The news has inflated all kinds of facts about it.
Yep.
We just had a sitting president step away, and drop out of the race after the primaries, which is concerning, because what happened to all those votes? That's the voice of the people, and we're towing a dangerous line with the way we're kind of doing things, and it's concerning.
Yeah, it is. Again, may you live in interesting times. These times are definitely interesting. One of the things that I tell people is, if you are not exhausted, you're not doing it right. If you're not working your ass off to stay on top of all the news and to be well-read in civics, you're not doing it right. If you're angry, you're also not doing it right. I think you need a certain amount of humility. You have to be willing to, the mind's like a parachute. It's got to be open to work. There's some stuff that's just abject nonsense, like those QAnon morons that are out there. And I'm sorry if you have any in your audience, but they are fucking morons. They are morons. And it amazes me that we have in our phones, we have the computing power, if not more, than what NASA used to send men to the moon in the 60s.
Oh yeah.
So it is amazing to me with the amount of data that we have access to, that people believe garbage like that. So it seems we should be so much more advanced intellectually, culturally, civically, and yet we've got people that think JFK Jr. and JFK are still alive, and there's body doubles and all this nonsense. If I wrote some of this stuff, Jeff, as a fiction author, I'd be laughed out of my editor's office. She'd say, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. But Mark Twain once said that the difference between fiction and reality is people expect fiction to make sense.
Yeah, I try to often tell my kids, like, listen, do your research. Don't just read an article and believe it. Like, do your research. And I showed them one day, just went on the TV from Fox to CNN to MSNBC, and we just watched it for a few minutes, and it was like they were talking about the same things, all in a different spin. I said, you have to do your research and find the facts. You can't believe TikTok and Facebook.
Nope.
You can't. You have to educate yourself.
And you're a great father to teach your kids that.
Well,
and by the way, Facebook and TikTok and some of these places, but particularly Facebook, is one of the most dangerous places to get your information, because people join Facebook pages and they silo themselves with people they believe think exactly the way they do. So when malign foreign interests sneak into those Facebook pages to inject disinformation, you think it's coming from all these people whom you trust who think just the way you do. So your guard is down. So that's one thing. Social media is terrible. It's where the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Chinese are absolutely filling people's heads with garbage. And the other problem, it's terrible. And the other problem we have when you mention Fox and CNN and MSNBC is something called audience capture, where now broadcast networks, whether they be mainstream or cable, they are being held hostage by their own audiences. They don't want to lose market share. This is why the New York Times has all their young staffers in an uproar when they publish an op-ed by Tom Cotton, a Republican, and all the young kind of lefty staffers there go nuts. Like, this isn't what our readers want to hear. Well, you're walking a very fine line there when you say you're only going to publish things that your readers want to hear and nothing they don't want to hear. Is that really journalistic integrity? And I could go down the line. It's not just the New York Times. I mean, it is Fox. You see all the nonsense that Fox did about the Dominion voting machines, and then they had to pay $800 million, almost $1 billion, for pushing that garbage out. And there's, I've had more friendships end, like, easily disprovable things. Oh, they had ballots, suitcases full of ballots in Georgia. No, you idiot. Those are the plastic boxes that they move ballots around throughout Georgia. Those things that's OSHA, you moron. That's so people that don't throw their backs out. That's so that they don't throw their shoulders out. That's so they don't. These are not
paper is heavy in bulk.
Paper's heavy. Yes, these are not Samsonite luggage things that they pulled out from under the desk. But the problem is once people have committed to a bad idea, there's a great French phrase, which is, I can't use logic to talk you out of something that logic didn't talk you into to begin with. It is one of my favorite phrases in French. So
I got to write that down.
Yeah, I know just from my own work, I know how much the Russians are pushing all this talk about civil war. There have just been a couple articles out in the last 2 months about how that's being pushed by the Russians. They want Americans talking about civil war. They want Americans at each other's throats. We are a great and noble country, and I wish people could take a breath, take a step back, and learn to it. You don't have to love your neighbor as yourself, but at least respect your neighbor. I don't want another 9/11 to have to bring us together. I really don't want that.
100% agree with you. Totally. I wish we could go back to where we just looked each other in the face and said, I don't agree. You want to go get a beer?
Agree. Yeah, we don't talk religion, sex, and politics. That used to be when I grew up, that's what my parents said. And just because somebody votes different than you doesn't mean that they're the enemy. These are your countrymen and women. And I get it. You may disagree with some of the things you think the other side will do if they get in power. That doesn't make them the enemy either. It's just, people are silly. And unfortunately, I don't think there's enough calm heads in the world, because I don't think calm heads get you the news. I think that's why, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the biggest knuckleheads to ever walk into Congress, but she does she's trouble. And she does the nonsense she does in these committee meetings where she insults people that come to testify and all that kind of stuff. So she can get a little 15-second or 30-second soundbite that she can use to fundraise off of. So when you needed money from the Republican Party could say, hey, knock that crap off. That's ridiculous. But as soon as we did McCain-Feingold and did all these other things where small dollar donors, like somebody who's angry at everything in Northern California, can send money to Marjorie Taylor Greene's campaign, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't need anything from the Republican Party anymore. So there really is no controlling interest. There's no coach for the team, right? There's no coach to say, we are sportsmanlike, okay? And I get it. Oh, the other side doesn't play by the rules. Why should we? And all this stuff. It's like we are allowing things to happen in politics that we would never allow to happen in Little League, that we would never allow our kids to do. A disrespect for the rules and for each other and things like this. So again, I don't want to see another 9/11 get us to a 9/12. I just don't. I hope not.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let's shift and do some of your research. The last
Sure.
time we talked was for Deadfall, and we kind of talked about Ukraine and current events. I want to talk now a little bit about your research and what you've done in the past. To include, you worked with Homeland Security in an analytic red cell. For those who maybe don't know what an analytic red cell is, can you tell them briefly what that is and what your involvement was like without getting yourself in trouble?
Sure. Well, yeah. So in the aftermath of 9/11, before the 9/11 Commission was stood up, the federal government realized that Al Qaeda had been successful because of a failure of imagination on the government's part, and they were determined never to be caught with their creative pants down again. So once the Department of Homeland Security was stood up, they created something called the Analytic Red Cell Unit, where nations are often criticized for fighting the next war by looking in the rearview mirror and expecting the next war to look like the last one did. So they said, let's bring in people who don't have this kind of institutional groupthink that is pervasive throughout the government and the intelligence community. There's some great thinkers in all those different spots, but there is kind of this calcified thinking, and it doesn't move as quickly as it should. It's not as creative as it should be. So the Analytic Red Cell Unit, the idea was, let's bring in creative thinkers from outside DC and sit them down with all the alphabets in the soup and see what kind of ideas we can come up with. Excuse me, ideas we can come up with. And so they invited people like me, Michael Bay, who is the Transformers director and did the Benghazi movie. And we helped war game different scenarios and things like that. Where might we get hit next, at home, abroad? What might that look like? Here are a few disparate things. Can you guys connect the dots on this? If you had a pair of Air Jordans that were purchased in Brooklyn, but were found on a boat sunk off the coast of Karachi, and there was a cell phone that was recovered in Rome that had this phone number on it, like weird stuff like that. Like, how would you connect those dots in a movie or a thriller novel, that kind of a thing? And I call it the Las Vegas of government programs, Jeff, because what happens in the red cell stays in the red cell. They wanted me to come in, and my dad's a Marine. So it was an honor for me because, unlike my dad, who was asked to pick up a rifle to serve his country, I wasn't asked to pick up a rifle. I was asked to use the gray matter between my ears. So it was an honor for me. They wanted me to come in, use my creativity the same way I do for the books, but anything that was talked about or developed within the red cell had to stay there. I could never take any of that and put in my books. In fact, there was one attack scenario that I worked up in there, and then it happened somewhere in the world. And I said to my contact at the red cell, I'm like, hey, can I go on Fox and talk about this? Because it's in every newspaper, it's on every TV. This is a pretty massive attack. And the red cell people said no. They said, we just don't talk about it. They only publicized one scenario ever that they had worked on. And that was how terrorists might take advantage of an approaching hurricane and the preparations we make. So could they attack a shelter full of people? Or could they go to a marshalling yard where, there's a lot of heavy equipment that will move out of the path of the storm so we can rush it back in to restore power and clear trees. And sometimes they'll move ambulances and fire trucks. Could they hit a marshalling yard? So that was the only scenario that they ever publicized for the Red Cell Unit.
For a guy like you who lives his life coming up with ideas, being kind of trapped in that box and saying, nope, can't take anything away from here. Or you're just sitting there going, what if I think of something really juicy, really good?
That was the trade-off. So I am a patriot and an American citizen before I'm a writer, and so it was my honor to just go in there and crank out as many ideas for them as they could. I was a fire hose. I'm like, what about this? What about that? What about this? They're like, ooh, slow down. So I was happy to do it. It was an honor to be invited to join that group.
Now,
So
you've also, for research, you went and shadowed a Black Ops team in
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. Was it like 2008? I think I
Yep.
saw.
Yep.
What was that like? Actually, being boots on the ground with a Black Ops team, stuff that you've written about before, and then now you're kind of living it.
Yeah, so these guys, so they weren't going after HVTs or anything like that. They weren't, or at least they weren't doing kinetic things. They weren't kicking in doors and shooting bad guys in the face. So essentially, what these guys were doing was gathering intel, developing their human networks and things like that. And I got to ride along on that kind of stuff, and it was fascinating because we would never go into a village that we hadn't already been invited into by the village elders because of the Pashto code of Pashtunwali, which is if you are an invited guest into the village, they will fight to the end, every last man in that village, to keep you safe because you are their guest. So that was a pretty cool thing when I was over there, and I got to see a lot of stuff. And it was funny at the very end, the guys told me that they didn't know how I was going to react once I arrived with them and actually put my boots on the tarmac. So they told me they had rented a hotel room for me in Kabul. And if I was freaking out or couldn't handle it, just Kabul, they were going to dump me in the hotel for a couple of weeks and come pick me up at the end when they were done with all the stuff they were doing. So that was kind of funny to hear. But yeah, I grew a big bushy beard. That was their big thing. Big bushy beard. They made me give them my sunglasses when I got there because they said nothing IDs you from a distance like a pair of sunglasses on. That wasn't a big thing. You didn't see the Afghan men rolling around with sunglasses. And, we had the man jammies at times and stuff like that to kind of very low profile, thin skinned vehicles. We weren't rolling around in armored vehicles and stuff. The whole idea was to just blend in and not stick out. Best fried chicken I've ever had in my life was in Jalalabad. It was pretty darn good. And I also learned that next to being a doctor, being an author is one of the most honorable professions in Afghanistan. They think that's a pretty big deal that you write books. So my guys totally introduced me. They said, "Oh, he's an author. He's written a lot of books and all this kind of stuff." So that gained me a lot of goodwill right away with anybody we met. They thought that was pretty cool that I wrote books. So it was a neat experience, really, really neat experience. We never got shot at. We heard gunfire in the distance and that kind of stuff, but no contact at all for us. We had all the stuff in the car if you needed it.
Right.
Lots and lots and lots of stuff in the car. I mean, it was amazing how much kit we rolled around with, but it was never necessary. Never necessary. Never had a moment where I feared for my life or anything like that.
When you heard that first snap of gunfire, even though it was off in the distance, how did you react? Did your heart kind of skip a beat a little?
Well, everybody heard it at the same time, and they all kind of looked at each other. And these guys are so used to it, they smiled, and they're like, "Oh, Thor, that's over. That's 2 hills over that way. Let us tell you what's on that side." And that's why you hear that. And we always hear it when we drive by here. It's nothing new. And so, no, I mean, I expected. I mean, we were driving into an active war zone. I expected to hear stuff. I wanted to go down to Kandahar and do something. There was a gathering that was going to happen down in Kandahar, and so one of the guys who really was plugged in on the ground and had really good contacts in that part of Afghanistan said, "You know what? We'd need a whole truckload of support to take us down there. There's no way. Just the amount of guns we've got in this car, it's not enough, and we'd need to get a whole bunch of guys to take with us, and we're not going to do that." And a few days later, like around the time that we would have gone down for this thing that was happening, I can't remember if it was a Loya Jirga or what it was, but there was a big bombing there. They had wanted to kill the local police commander, and so a lot of people were injured. Several people were killed, and so the guy on the team that had originally said no to going down to Kandahar for this thing said, "Thor, if we had listened to you, who knows what would have happened? So if you need to take a leak, you don't get to tell me when we're stopping. You don't get to pick the place. If we go someplace and they offer us tea or Coca-Colas and you say Coca-Colas, the rest of us are taking tea because your judgment." I was like, how could I know that was going to happen? But so the whole thing for the rest of the trip was anything Thor thinks, we do the opposite. It was kind of them like ribbing me for the rest of the time in Afghanistan, it was pretty funny. It's pretty funny. I mean, the
So,
bombing wasn't funny. The suicide bombing
no, yeah,
absolutely was not
of
funny,
course
but
not.
them kind of saying that I almost walked them into a suicide bombing, which was totally not the case. I mean, they were
Yeah,
very smart to say Kandahar's not safe. We don't have enough guys. We're just asking for trouble. And I was like, okay, I didn't press it. They know the country much better than I do. And I'm like, okay, great. We don't have to go. And I'm glad we didn't go, obviously.
yeah.
So
So, for Shadow of Doubt, you did a lot of research, but you did something. You researched someone who I read his book, I've seen him on some podcasts, and I'm probably going to butcher his name. I think it was Peter Zihan or Zihan.
Peter
Zion.
Zion. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's fantastic.
interesting guy. I watched him on Joe Rogan, and I sat there
Yep.
and I listened for probably an hour and a half. I don't think Joe Rogan talked more than maybe once or
Oh,
twice. This guy was just a fire hose of knowledge. So I bought his
so
book.
smart.
The book's the same way, fire hose
Yeah.
of knowledge. Like, what did you learn from him in that?
So Peter used to be at a company called Strat4 down in Texas, and a good friend of mine was at Strat4 forever. A gentleman who used to be with the Diplomatic Security Service named Fred Burton, and Peter has Peter's brilliant as far as geopolitics are concerned. I think he's really, really smart. And
Mhm.
one of the things that a drum he has been banging, and I think rightly so, and he really educated me through his books and through his videos. I have not met Peter yet. I give him a big shout out in the back of my book. That's the hardest thing with writing fiction. I can't footnote it. So if there's somebody, I don't want to take credit for Peter's ideas. And that's why Peter gets such a big shout out in the
Yeah,
back of the
you
book, because I
did.
want to be very clear that the head of Russia House in my book, the ideas that she's discussing are actually Peter's ideas. So I claim no authorship over that. I think Peter is, I mean, obviously I take his ideas and put them in the mouths of different people at the CIA, but I think his ideas are especially important and interesting now because Russia is in a state of demographic decline.
Mhm.
So, according to Peter, this is the last generation of fighting age males that the Russians are going to have. They're not going to be able to fight or field an army after this. And the problem with Russia is that it's very wide and very flat. That is hard territory to defend. And there are basically 9 gateways, 9 ways that invading armies have poured into Russia, Soviet Union, whatever you want to say. Well, not Soviet Union, but Russia. There's 9 ways they've poured in, and Putin needs to control these gateways if he's going to keep Russia from being invaded, because he doesn't have enough. He doesn't have enough soldiers. Ukraine is just eating away at all of their material. He's not going to be able to defend Russia unless he gets control of these gateways, and he has to do it now. He can't wait. They've only got men to do it now, and it's Putin's playing a lot of peekaboo because he doesn't want to recruit white men out of Moscow or St. Petersburg because he's afraid there'll be a political revolution. So he's eating around at the edges of Russia, trying to get people to drop him into the meat grinder in Ukraine. But this idea that now Putin needs to move, it's now or never, was Zion's thing that I thought was fascinating. He has a geographic problem that he's trying to solve with a declining demographic solution. So he's running out. It's like you got to put out a fire and there's leaks in your fire hose and the well is almost dry and you
Mhm.
need to put out this fire. If this fire doesn't get put out, you lose your house. And that's kind of that was a take on the revanchism of Putin that I had not heard before. And Zion is, like I say, you've listened to him, you saw him on Rogan. He's brilliant. And so you
Yes.
listen to how he describes this. And politics are downstream of culture. And so I like to put things in my books that I think people should be thinking about. And my job is to entertain you. It's not to educate you. I want you to have toes in the sand, book in the hand, have a great thrill ride. But if you close one of my thrillers a little bit smarter, you know a couple of things that
Oh yeah.
just snuck in by
Yeah.
osmosis by reading the book, that's great. I mean, you don't even know that they got into your head and yet they're there and you're like, I read a book and said this about Russia. That to me, if I entertain you, I've done my job as an author. If you close one of my books smarter, I've done my job as an American, because I think it's important that we all kind of know what's going on in the world. You don't have to be an expert, and I don't have to stand on a soapbox and preach at you, but I think some of these issues are exciting, especially when you're dealing with an espionage thriller. You could make everything up, but so much of what's happening in the real world is just there, and it's
Mhm.
so fascinating. Why wouldn't you want to use it? So that's kind of my approach with this stuff.
Yeah, I took a lot of notes. I earmarked so many pages in the book as I was reading because I was like, want to ask him about that one. I totally forgot about the nine gates thing, which I think
Yeah,
is huge when it
right.
comes to the larger strategy of things. Like people don't think about that. People think Putin's just protecting Moscow. He's protecting he's protecting such a vulnerability that we don't understand how vulnerable it really is. And I'm glad you brought that up because I had forgotten about that. And
Yeah.
that's crazy.
It explains, why he went into Chechnya. I mean,
Hmm.
all of this, when you look at it as there are nine gates into Russia, and you need to control all nine gates. And after World War II, they did control, the Soviets controlled all nine gates. So if you leave any gate open, that's the way your enemy is going to come in. Of course, he wants to control all nine gates. I'm not saying that's okay, but it explains why he's so aggressive and expansionist and all this kind of stuff. He's not in Ukraine just because he wants to be in Ukraine. Ukraine is a stepping stone towards something else where he needs, and it's also why Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are terrified, and so are the Poles. Because after Ukraine, the next step's going to be Poland. So I mean, in the Baltic NATO members, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So when you can see Putin's geographic problem, you understand a little bit more about why he's doing what he's doing. If you don't understand the geography of Russia, it's kind of like, well, it's difficult to understand Putin, so I'm just not going to think about it.
Well,
So
and something I think the media spins really, really well is that Putin hates NATO. He's
yeah,
threatened
it's
by
because
NATO.
of NATO that he's doing this.
NATO's the big bad guy. They're being bully and all that. Piece that together with the fact that what he's trying to do with the nine gates thing, and then it makes a little more sense, especially geographically when you start to look at it. You go, oh, well, it just so happens that he's trying to protect what he's got and his vulnerabilities, and we're kind of
Exactly.
surrounding that, and you got to take it with a grain of salt, obviously, when you hear those
Yeah,
headlines.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of course you do. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I love Peter's take on all this stuff, and I I love smart people. I love smart people.
He's
I
so
could
smart.
sit and listen, and he's so smart. He's so personable. Even those little 8-minute clips he puts up on YouTube on
Hmm.
almost a daily basis. It's how I start my day. I get a cup of coffee and Peter. I mean, I think he's just a brilliant, brilliant guy. His books are fantastic. I highly recommend his books. I just think anytime you have a touch point with Peter Zion, you walk away smarter.
Oh
That's
yeah.
just my opinion about him. I think he's terrific.
Now,
So,
something else you mentioned in Shadow of Doubt is bourbon, and I got to
yeah.
ask you. Yeah, I'm a bourbon guy. But I have never had a Pappy bottle. Never. I've never tasted it. Have you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Is it as
It's
good as it says, as everybody says it
yeah,
is?
it is. I love it. I think it is the best bourbon I've ever had, and I like bourbon. It's very difficult to find Pappy Van Winkle,
Hmm.
but I'm a huge fan of Pappy. I'm a big fan, which is why I write about it in so many of the books.
What's your
It's my
favorite
favorite.
bourbon?
So Pappy is my favorite bourbon. It's expensive. I don't drink it every single day. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? I've
tough
got a
to get.
bottle and I've got like this much left in the bottle, and I just don't want to. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm too old to have another baby to celebrate with. You know what I mean? So maybe if our TV show gets sold sometime before the end of the year, I'll celebrate then. I have a whiskey. It's funny. Part of our TV show deal, the one of our executive producers is Howard Gordon, who is the force behind 24 and Homeland. So Howard's an executive producer, and years ago, everybody wants to be a thriller author. Years ago, Howard wrote a thriller, and I blurbed it for him. And as a thank you, Howard sent me a beautiful bottle of Lafroig whiskey, and I have this much left in it. And when all these years later, Howard and I came back together, and I got Howard. Our team got Howard to come on board as executive producer for the Harvath TV series. We were on a Zoom, and I said, Howard, I had the bottle. I said, I've got this much, and once we get this show on the air, I'm going to celebrate by drinking the last bit of scotch that you gave me. I don't know. It has to be maybe 15 years ago. Howard sent me that bottle. So
Wow.
anyway, kind of fun.
Yeah, my wife bought me a bottle of Macallan 21 for my military
Oh,
retirement, and
nice bottle.
it is liquid gold, and I've been
Yeah.
savoring. Yeah, I literally kept the wood box that it came in, and I've
Yeah.
written on the inside the dates and the occasion
Oh, that's
when
cool.
I've had it. And I've only had it like with my dad when my son came home from his deployment
Oh,
in
nice.
Africa. Like it's only been cracked open like 4 times for specific reasons. And golly, that's best bottle of
Yeah.
whiskey of any form I've ever had is that Macallan 21.
That's good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff. I love that you're keeping track. It's almost like measuring one of your kids as they grow in the door frame, but it's kind of
Yeah.
going in reverse. But
Right.
it's nice to remember the circumstances under which you enjoyed that. That's good for
Exactly.
you.
Well, I was
Yeah.
going to ask you about, the Harvath TV series or movie, if there's any updates. You kind of went into it a little bit. Is there anything else you want to share about it to
Well,
keep people up to date?
yeah, listen, I mean, we had a big announcement right before the spring that we landed Steve Lightfoot, who was the writer of The Punisher, both seasons that were on Netflix. Now it's back or now it's at Disney Plus because Disney's been pulling their IP back. So Punisher's over at Disney Plus. So he did a great job with Punisher. He's written a couple of other things. He's got a show based on a book that's a very visceral, very intense show on Apple now called Shantaram, which is a great, very, very powerful series. And he just gets it. He gets the military ethos. He's got so many friends from growing up who went into the military, and he just understands that. And I thought he did a great job with Punisher, with John Bernthal.
Oh my
So we've
gosh.
got,
Yes.
yeah. So Steve's, yeah, I just happened to see the scene in the prison where that huge freaking guy comes in and starts wailing on him in the prison cell. So Steve's a fabulous writer. We've got Chad Stahelski, who's the John Wick director. It's an A+ team. So now this fall we start doing our pitches, at Netflix and Apple and Amazon and HBO and Showtime and all those different places. So we go out and we start pitching. So it's going to be interesting to see where the Harvest series finds a home. Knock on wood, we'll see what happens. This is what's funny is I get so many people on social media for years. When are you going to have a movie? When are you going to have a TV show? And I'm like, I have no say in it.
Right.
You option the rights to Hollywood. They get it it's like renting with the option to buy. So they rent the rights from you for like, a year and a half, and then they can extend that by a year and a half. So before you know it, you're tied up with somebody for 3 years and they don't get it made. So then you're off to the next person who's interested in it. So, it's amazing anything at all gets made in Hollywood.
Yes.
It can be very difficult. I know Ludlum got a couple of made-for-TV movies done, like a couple of miniseries type things, but Ludlum never saw a feature-length motion picture during his lifetime, nor did, regrettably, because he died too young, Vince Flynn, with the Mitch Rapp character. When American Assassin came out, that was after Vince had passed, and they never made another one. I'd like to think that if Vince had been around and had a say in the making of that it might have been something where there was, CBS Films did another one and another one and another one. And unfortunately that didn't happen. And that's such a great franchise. And sometimes, as my entertainment attorney says, and I think they teach all lawyers this in law school, sometimes the best deal is the deal you don't make. So better to have gotten in bed with people and not have had anything made than to have gotten in bed with somebody and had something crummy made, and then that's it. Nobody will touch your stuff from that point forward. Imagine if the first James Bond movie sucked. Ian Fleming would never, if Dr. No had been a bomb, that would have been it. You and I wouldn't know Ian Fleming's name now.
Oh, it might have changed the entire genre forever.
Sure.
It could have
Yeah.
had the people who made that decision changed the world because
The Broccoli's. Yeah, Cubby Broccoli. Yeah.
huge
Yeah. I mean,
decision.
big deal. So again, it's really, and I get it. My readers are fabulous people and they love the books, and I can see it too. I think it, we should have been on the screen years ago, but it's completely out of my control. And that is part of me practicing my stoicism, is realizing, okay, once the check comes in the mail and I cash it, that's it. That's it. The Hollywood people have to make it happen. So that's why you want to get in bed with the best people possible. And we've got such an A+ team. And
Yeah,
that's my entertainment attorney, who's one of my dearest friends, said, you know what? All of those deals, all those options that didn't happen in the past, all of that is worth it to be with the people we are now and to be at Sony, to have such an A+ team, because how could you walk that into Netflix and not have Netflix start seeing dollar signs right away and be like, oh my God, Howard Gordon, Chad Stahelski, Steve Lightfoot, everything these guys touches makes tons of money. So yeah, okay. Don't walk across the street to Amazon or Apple. We'll write you a check right here in the room. That's the hope. That's what you always wish, is that somebody buys it in the room and does a preemptive to knock everybody else out so there's no bidding war. That'd be awesome. But we'll see.
Oh, I selfishly, as a fan, I want to see it really bad. I know I'm speaking for all the other, Brad Thor and Scot Harvath fans. We need Harvath on the big screen.
I
Whether
want to
it's,
see it.
I'd love to have it as a series. And just have several seasons and just get years out of it. Would be
That's what I'd love
fantastic.
to. I'd love to. Well, we've told, we've said that Sony got the rights to the books. It's like buying the Marvel universe. I mean, we're here talking about Shadow of Doubt, which is my 24th novel, 23 in the Harvath series. So they've got a lot of material there. They could spin off a series on the Troll or whatever. I mean, there's so many different things they could do. It's they really are buying a universe of IP that they could do a lot with. So we'll see what happens. I mean, all of my interactions have been so awesome. The people at Sony are first class, such professionals. Howard Gordon, Chad Stahelski. I mean, it's like a dream come true. And what's nice for me is the producers, Sean and Yvette Reddick, who packaged and put this whole thing together. They said, who do you want to direct? And I said, there's only one director I want. That's Chad Stahelski. And they're like, we'll get him for you. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah. They said, okay, now you want an executive producer who really knows what he's doing with TV. Who do you want? I'm like, Howard Gordon. They're like, all right, we'll get Howard. And so this is my dream team. I actually got to pick Howard. I got to pick Chad Stahelski.
Which is cool, because
It's unheard of.
Yeah.
It's unheard of in Hollywood. And we're at Sony, which is fantastic. So all the stars are aligned now. We're on the 2-yard line. We just have to get the ball into the end zone by the end of the year. So fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
So in Shadow of Doubt, Harvath is kind of at an impasse. I'm trying to be spoiler free here, so
yeah, no, I hear you.
He kind of questions, oh, is this time catching up to me? He makes a few decisions that are pretty important to his future, but you kind of get a little bit of a hint that he's taking that deep breath finally and going, ugh, is that important to where you're going with Harvath into the future?
You know what? I was looking to put Harvath through as much kind of inner turmoil as he's experiencing externally. And so this idea that the CIA came to Harvath with a not even morally ambiguous, I think morally wrong assignment, and tried to press him into service. And when Harvath said not only no, but fuck no, pardon my French, I'm going to get us the explicit content warning on your podcast, Jeff. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Feel free to bleep that out. But this idea that when Harvath told the CIA to go pound sand, that they then said, well, you remember when this happened on your assignment a couple of years ago? We're going to now blackmail you with that. So we're going to put you in a situation where at least we at the CIA think you can't say no to us, and we're going to press you into service. And I thought that's an interesting thing we haven't seen with Harvath. If you think the lines of Lucerne, the U.S. government was chasing him, even though he had not done anything wrong. They thought he was the villain in that plot. And so Harvath has willingly stood up again and again and again and again and again to take any and every assignment that's been handed to him, not only because of his patriotism, but Harvath also has a little bit of a mental defect in that he thinks he's the best. Nobody else can do it as well as he can. So I've always likened him to Tom Brady, where, Harvath won't step off the field until he's ready, till he's convinced that he can't do the job anymore. And that's a big thing, because Harvath was taking injectables, steroids, and stuff like that, like guys that I know that are in the same position that don't want to come out of the field, that still want to kick indoors and shoot bad guys in the face, and they don't want to sit behind a desk. And Harvath wrestles with that a lot. So that was fun to kind of touch upon in this book, and where Nicholas, his buddy, is career-wise and stuff. Every time I turn, I'm not an outliner, Jeff. I don't know how you are with writing. If you're a pantser or if you're an outliner, there's no wrong answer.
I tried to outline, and then I find myself trying to stick to it as opposed to letting creativity
That happens.
overtake the keys, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm more of a rough. I rough it, and then I
Okay.
go with it, and I just try to make sure I'm not doing any plot holes.
Okay. Well, that's I'm definitely a pantser. So when the muse tells me something, I've been at this, and for those who are listening or watching, I tell people my books are like the Bond movies. That if you've never read a Brad Thor book before, you can start with Shadow of Doubt. It's like going to your local multiplex and seeing the new James Bond movie. You don't need to have ever seen a prior Bond movie. You're going to be fine. You'll get
Yeah,
caught up. You know who he is, what he's about. Same thing with my books. So it's important for me to give people a really, really good thrill ride. I want them to have this toes in the sand, book in the hand, short, crisp, cinematic chapters, and to keep ripping through them. And I like to give my long-term readers some surprises that they won't have seen coming. And of course, I want every reader to have that. But what was fun with this book is that I was able to, like, I'm looking over at my shelf here, and it's got to be, I don't know how many books back Foreign Influence was, but there's a little scene in Foreign Influence where Harvath's escaping from a hotel, and he hops in a car that's idling with the valet, a supercar, and there's this beautiful blonde woman in the passenger seat, and he takes off. That woman comes back at the end of Near Dark, and she
hmm
comes back, which was about 4 books ago, and she comes back in this book. And so it's that kind of an Easter eggy type thing is fun for long-term readers because they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd see
yeah,
her again.
yeah. I loved catching some of that in this one.
Yeah, it was fun. There's something that happens at the end of Near Dark where Harvath leaves his team down in the garage and says, I'm going to go up and deal with this last target I have. You guys stay down here. I got this. I'll be back in a few minutes. Keep the engine running. Keep the doors locked, the windows up, and keep the engine running. And
hmm
Harvath comes back, and it is a different outcome than what his teammates thought was going to happen when he went upstairs. And great. It was satisfying. It was a perfect ending. But in the back of my mind, I knew that one other thing happened in that meeting, and someday I was going to reveal it. And that's part of what the CIA uses to blackmail Harvath with in Shadow of Doubt. Now, you don't need to have read Near Dark. There's no need to read Near Dark to be able to appreciate this piece of blackmail information. But if you have, it's going to be fun for you because you're going to go, oh my God, he what?
hmm
He what?
hmm
So that's fun. And that was just, I was lucky the muse was talking to me. She was in my ear a bunch, and I did whatever she told me to do.
It was
Whatever she
great.
said, I did.
This one felt very, I want to, like a throwback almost. You're like, it's very
Cool.
nostalgic. Like
I love it.
I enjoyed the pieces of that where I was like, oh, and then the humility Harvath starts to get. Like this was, all your books are fantastic, but this goes up
Oh,
into
thank
my
you.
top 5 for sure because
Wow.
I
Wow.
really enjoyed it. I thought you crushed it this time, and
Thank you.
it starts off like full black. It starts off like full black, just guns
Hmm.
blazing, ready to roll, and then it slides into like Spy Master, Near Dark. It just you crafted it perfectly. I mean, I can't say that any better.
I thank you. And I would love to reveal a little nugget to you if I can,
Yes.
kind of my thinking behind something. So I'm going to say this because we put chapter 1 out with Jean-Jacques Jadot, the French intelligence officer who realizes the French government and the intel services in France are shot through with Russian spies. Um, the weapon that appears in that first chapter, I had dinner many years ago with the director of the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. His name is Chris Costa. And Chris is a fascinating guy. And I like to ask people questions that they probably haven't been asked before. And so I'm having dinner with Chris in D.C., and he's talking about the Spy Museum and everything, which if you haven't been and you're going to DC, put it at the top of your list. It is an awesome museum. They just got done with the cars of the Bond movies. So they had all the cars
Mm.
there, the Lotus that goes underwater, the Aston Martin, it's pretty cool, and some other vehicles from the movies. But I asked Chris, I said, what's one of the most unusual and interesting things you have in the museum? And he says, oh, by far, what I think is one of the coolest is, he said, we have the ice axe that was used to assassinate Trotsky in Mexico City when Stalin sent assassins after him. And I had had that conversation with Chris Costa in the back of my mind for years. And I said, one of these days, I'm going to put an ice axe in the book, and the assassin will be doing it as kind of an homage to the assassination of Trotsky. And so that's how an ice axe ends up in chapter 1 of the book. It's because of Chris, the director of the Spy Museum, and that dinner we had all those years ago. So writers are like flypaper for interesting bits of information and all that kind of stuff. It never disappears until you have a chance to use it. So it's kind of fun.
I was writing a short story like a year and a half ago, and it was centered around an ice axe being a weapon
Oh,
that
wow.
somebody the protagonist uses to kill someone. And I was telling my wife about it. She was like, why would you use an ice axe? And I was like, well, your girly books don't we like violence over here, okay?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I told her that, and then when I read that in here, I walked up to her and I was like, see, it
Ice
is
axe
cool.
right
It is
here.
cool.
Ice axe. It is cool. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. You got this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I
You
got to throw
rarely
it
get a
kind of.
point like that. And I told you so like that with your spouse.
Yes, and I said, and look who's validating it. Look who's on the cover here. But she was just like, go away. All right,
That's funny.
before I let you go, I got some rapid fire kind of fun questions to
Sure.
ask you.
Sure.
So if you were stuck on an island for a year and you could only bring 3 albums to listen to, what would they be?
So the greatest hits of Dinah Washington. I'm a huge fan. Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones,
Mm,
and Mothership Connection by George Clinton and
very
P
nice.
Funk. So there you
Okay.
go. That'd be my 3. A little bit of classic rock and roll, great American songbook, and then just the best funk to ever been
Yeah.
laid down on the planet. So there you go. That'd be my 3.
Perfect. What is Brad Thor's guilty pleasure?
We already talked about bourbon. I mean, so uh, bourbon is bourbon is one. I've got a friend down here who's a songwriter named John Bettis, and John wrote a lot of the hits for the Carpenters. And John asked me a really interesting question. He said, "Brad, how do you recharge your creative battery after a project?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, when I would wrap an album with the Carpenters, I would sail my sailboat out to Catalina. I'd anchor off Catalina, and I wouldn't set foot on land for a week, and I'd only eat what I could pull out of the ocean." So for me, my guiltiest pleasure is international travel. I love to go to a different country, experience a new culture, and sit in cafes. Just sit, watch people walk by. That is probably my guiltiest, my pleasure, my favorite thing to do.
Okay. If you could solve one unsolved mystery, what would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a
Yeah,
great
that's a
question.
big one because
It
there's so
is.
many.
It is. Yeah, there's so many. Part. I guess if I got to go through because I wouldn't want to like solve did a certain religious figure exist, because then it removes faith for people. It would leave people in darkness if you could, and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe you could prove a certain person who brought a religion. I would love to know. I remember one of the first adult books I read as a little kid, I grabbed out of my parents had this big basket of books at our lake house in the summertime. And one of the first adult books I read as a youngster was Chariot of the Gods. This idea that aliens had visited, I sound like that guy that looks like he's been hit by lightning on the History Channel, ancient aliens, Sukalos or whatever he is with all
Yeah,
that
yeah.
hair. But that'd be a mystery I would love to try to solve, is how did all these pyramids pop up around the globe at kind of the same time, and was there some kind of not of this earth force that was involved there? I think that'd be really cool. Is there other intelligent life in the universe? That would be a cool mystery to solve.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, Brad, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for coming back again. But tell people where they can go to find more about you, follow along, and get their copy of Shadow of Doubt.
Yeah. So the best place is to come to Brad Thor, BradThor.com. I've got a lot of supporting material for the book. Where'd I get the ideas from? What's the book about? All that kind of stuff. So BradThor.com, and it links out to all my social media accounts and all that kind of stuff. So there you go.
Well, thanks again. I'm going to see you in a couple weeks at BoucherCon. You're one of the big guests that are going to be
Hey,
there. So
yes.
I'm looking forward to hearing you talk. I'm moderating a panel this year, so I'm super excited.
Terrific. Well, maybe you and I could have some brown water together at BoucherCon.
Yes, sir. I will find you for sure, and we'll do that. And again, thanks again. Good luck with Shadow of Doubt. It's great, fantastic. It's top 5 Harvath book in my opinion.
Well, thanks for all the kind words, and thank you for sharing me with your audience. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.